Paris, 1945. The Second World War has ended, but France's economy is fragile. Africa, rich in resources, remains its economic lifeline. French officials, seated around an oak table, draft a plan. A new currency, the CFA Franc, Franc des Colonies Françaises d'Afrique, will be created. It will serve two purposes: stabilizing France's economy and ensuring African colonies remain dependent on their former masters. The currency is introduced across French West and Central Africa, binding them to an economic system where decisions are made in Paris, not in Africa. The CFA franc is no ordinary currency. Unlike the British and Belgian colonies that print their own money, African nations using the CFA franc have no control over their monetary policy. The currency is pegged to the French franc, ensuring France dictates inflation, devaluation, and financial regulations. Even worse, African countries must deposit 50% of their foreign reserves into the French Treasury, a requirement that will remain for decades. The 1960s mark a turning point. One by one, African nations declare independence. Flags are raised, new governments are formed, but one thing remains untouched: the CFA franc. While France may have loosened its political grip, its economic control remains firm. Presidents like Léopold Sédar Senghor of Senegal and Félix Houphouët-Boigny of Côte d'Ivoire, both with strong ties to France, keep the system in place. Meanwhile, African economies continue to enrich France. But not every leader accepts this system. In 1963, Sylvanus Olympio, the first president of Togo, decides to break away. He plans to introduce a new Togolese currency, separate from the CFA franc. His efforts alarm France. On January 13, 1963, he is assassinated, shot dead in front of the U.S. Embassy. The message is clear: those who challenge France's economic rule will not be spared. Decades later, another leader dares to fight the system: Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. Charismatic and revolutionary, he denounces the CFA franc as a tool of economic slavery. He calls on other African nations to abandon it. But his resistance is short-lived. In 1987, a coup led by Blaise Compaoré, with alleged French backing, ends his life. Another leader silenced for challenging the status quo. From the 1990s onward, African nations attempt to renegotiate their financial dependence. France, however, uses military interventions to maintain influence. In Côte d'Ivoire, Mali, and Chad, whenever leaders question the CFA franc, French troops arrive under the guise of stability missions. Economic control is reinforced through military dominance. Then comes the shock of